an original story narrated exclusively for love written in silence. Eleanor Blackwood stands frozen in the grand foyer as her sister's words cut through her like a blade. You're easy to ignore. Light streams through the tall windows, illuminating her sister's perfect silhouette, while leaving Eleanor in shadow, her fingers trembling against the fabric of her simple dress. Behind closed doors, she manages the crumbling family finances with quiet precision, her botanical journals the only witness to her true self. The Duke of Harrington's penetrating gaze finds her across the crowded ballroom, seeing past her carefully constructed invisibility to something no one else has bothered to notice. When he extends his hand, Eleanor hesitates, knowing that stepping into the light means facing the truth about her family and herself. In the Blackwood household, there existed a clear hierarchy. Lady Blackwood, with her fading beauty and sharp tongue, occupied the highest position. Then came Marianne, the eldest daughter, whose beauty and charm were the family's greatest assets. Next was Catherine, whose musical talents had drawn the attention of several eligible bachelors. And then there was Eleanor. Eleanor Blackwood existed in the shadows of her family's modest but respectable townhouse. She was neither the most beautiful nor the most accomplished of the Blackwood daughters. What she possessed instead was an acute understanding of household management, a talent for numbers, and a passion for botanical illustration that she pursued in precious stolen moments. On this particular morning, Eleanor sat at the breakfast table, carefully reviewing the household accounts. The numbers revealed what she alone seemed to understand. Their financial situation was precarious, teetering on the edge of ruin. "Mother, the invitation to Lady Whitmore's ball arrived," Marianne announced, sweeping into the room in a flurry of expensive fabric. "Catherine and I must have new gowns." Eleanor looked up. "I'm not certain we can afford." "No one asked you," Catherine interrupted, not bothering to glance in Eleanor's direction. "I was merely suggesting." Eleanor tried again. Lady Blackwood waved a dismissive hand. "Eleanor, leave such matters to those who understand society's expectations." Eleanor fell silent, returning to her ledger as the conversation continued around her, through her, as if she were merely a piece of furniture. When she rose to speak with the housekeeper about the day's meals, she accidentally brushed against Marianne's chair. "Do mind where you're going," Marianne snapped. "Sometimes I forget you're even in the room." "I apologize," Eleanor murmured. Marianne's perfect lips curved into a smile that never reached her eyes. "It's not your fault, really. You're easy to ignore." The words hung in the air, a truth spoken aloud that everyone acknowledged with their silence. Eleanor nodded once and left the room, her existence once again fading into the background of the Blackwood household. Eleanor's days followed a predictable pattern. She rose before the rest of the household, reviewed the accounts over a solitary breakfast, then, with the housekeeper to plan meals that appeared more lavish than their budget allowed, she mended linens, managed correspondence that her mother deemed too tedious, and ensured that her sister's gowns were always immaculate. In the afternoons, while her sisters practiced their accomplishments in the drawing room, Marianne perfecting her French, Catherine at the pianoforte, Eleanor retreated to her small bedroom in the east wing. There, beside the window that offered the best light, she kept her botanical journals. Each page contained meticulous illustrations of plants she'd observed in the small garden behind their townhouse, or during rare visits to the park. These journals were her sanctuary, the only place where her thoughts and observations mattered. She recorded not only the scientific details of each specimen, but also her impressions. How the light caught the edge of a petal, how the leaves unfurled after rain. In these pages, she existed completely. "Eleanor," her mother's voice shattered her concentration. "Where have you hidden yourself? We need you downstairs." With a sigh, Eleanor closed her journal and tucked it beneath her mattress. Duty called, as it always did. Downstairs, she found her mother and sisters in a state of excitement. "The season's most important event," Lady Blackwood was saying. "Lady Whitmore's annual ball will determine everything. If Marianne can secure Lord Pembroke's attention, our situation might yet be salvaged." Eleanor knew what her mother meant. Lord Pembroke was wealthy enough to overlook the Blackwood family's dwindling fortunes in exchange for Marianne's beauty and connections. What her family didn't know What Eleanor had kept from them was that their financial situation was far worse than they imagined. Their father's death 3 years prior had left them with mounting debts that Eleanor had managed to conceal through careful budgeting and the quiet selling of family heirlooms. "We'll need new gowns," Catherine insisted. "Last season's styles won't do." Eleanor bit her lip. Perhaps alterations would. Alterations. Marianne's laugh was like crystal breaking. "We're not shopkeepers' daughters, Eleanor." "Of course," Eleanor conceded. "I'll speak with the modiste tomorrow. And we'll need to order flowers, arrange for the carriage to be polished." Lady Blackwood continued listing requirements that would strain their finances further. Eleanor listened, making mental calculations. She would need to sell her grandmother's silver hairbrush to cover these expenses. It was one of the few valuable items she had kept for herself. But her sister's prospects took precedence over sentimentality. That evening, as Eleanor helped her mother sort through the day's correspondence, a particular envelope caught her attention. The heavy cream paper bore Lady Whitmore's seal. "Mother," she said, "there's another invitation from Lady Whitmore." Lady Blackwood glanced at it dismissively. "Probably for your cousin Anne. Lady Whitmore often confuses our addresses." Eleanor opened the envelope. "No, it's addressed to Miss Eleanor Blackwood." Her mother's eyebrows rose in surprise. "How curious. Lady Whitmore must be inviting every eligible young woman this year. Her ballroom is certainly large enough. Does this mean I'm to attend as well?" Eleanor asked, a small flutter of excitement rising in her chest. Lady Blackwood studied her middle daughter with an appraising eye. Eleanor, in her simple day dress with her hair pulled back in a practical style, was a stark contrast to her polished sisters. "I suppose it would be rude to decline," her mother finally said. "And having 3 daughters present might improve our standing. You'll need something suitable to wear." "I can alter one of my old gowns," Eleanor offered quickly, not wanting to add to their expenses. "Yes, that would be best," her mother agreed. "Something modest and unobtrusive. We wouldn't want to distract attention from your sisters." Eleanor nodded, clutching the invitation. For the first time in years, she would attend a significant social event, not as a chaperone, but as a participant. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. She knew her role would be to fade into the background, to support her sister's efforts to secure advantageous matches. Yet still, for one evening, she would be counted among the guests rather than the furniture. Night, she removed her botanical journal from its hiding place and opened to a fresh page. Instead of plants, she sketched a simple gown design, adding notes about the alterations she would make to her old blue dress. It wasn't fashionable, but with some clever adjustments, it might at least appear dignified. As she worked, Eleanor allowed herself a small, private smile. For one night, she would step out of the shadows. She harbored no illusions about catching anyone's attention. She was, after all, easy to ignore. But perhaps, just perhaps, she might experience a moment of visibility before returning to her invisible existence. The Whitmore ballroom blazed with hundreds of candles, their light reflecting off crystal chandeliers and the jewels adorning London's elite. Eleanor stood near the wall, her altered blue gown simple but neat, her hair arranged in a modest style that had taken her hours to perfect without a lady's maid. She watched as Marianne and Catherine moved through the crowd with practiced grace, their new gowns drawing admiring glances. Lady Blackwood hovered nearby, expertly steering eligible gentlemen toward her eldest daughters, while exchanging pleasantries with influential matrons. Eleanor was content to observe. She noted the intricate patterns in the parquet flooring, the precise arrangement of flowers that decorated the room, the subtle social cues that determined who approached whom. She had no expectations for herself beyond avoiding embarrassment and perhaps enjoying a glass of punch. "You seem remarkably unimpressed by all this splendor," a deep voice said beside her. Eleanor startled, turning to find herself face to face with a tall gentleman, whose dark attire stood out amid the colorful peacockery of the other male guests. His features were striking rather than handsome, strong jaw, intelligent eyes, and an expression that suggested he found most social gatherings tedious. With a jolt, Eleanor recognized him, the Duke of Harrington, one of the most powerful men in England, known for his integrity and discerning judgment. Why on earth was he speaking to her? "Your Grace," she managed, dropping into a curtsy. I am merely taking a moment to appreciate the details others might miss. His eyebrow rose slightly. Such as? Eleanor hesitated, unused to having her observations valued. The flowers, for instance. Lady Whitmore has combined varieties that bloom in different seasons. She must have access to impressive hothouses. The Duke's gaze sharpened with interest. You have knowledge of botany. A modest interest only, Eleanor replied, conscious of not appearing too scholarly. Ladies with intellectual pursuits were often viewed with suspicion. Modesty and knowledge, a rare combination in these rooms. His tone was dry but not unkind. May I know your name? Miss Eleanor Blackwood, Your Grace. Ah, one of the Blackwood sisters. He glanced across the room, where Marianne was surrounded by admirers. Though not the one currently commanding all attention, Eleanor smiled slightly. My sisters shine in society. I prefer quieter pursuits. Like botanical observation, there was genuine curiosity in his question. Among other things, I find beauty in what others overlook. The Duke studied her for a moment. A valuable perspective, Miss Blackwood. A waltz began, and Eleanor expected him to excuse himself. Instead, he remained beside her, his tall frame creating a small pocket of privacy in the crowded room. Do you dance, Miss Blackwood? The question caught her off guard. I know the steps, Your Grace, but I rarely have occasion to practice them. Would you honor me with this dance? Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. I fear I would disappoint, Your Grace. I doubt that very much, he replied, offering his hand. Against all reason. Eleanor placed her gloved fingers in his. As he led her onto the dance floor, she felt the weight of curious stares. The Duke of Harrington rarely danced, and never with obscure young ladies from families of modest means. His hand at her waist was proper, but steady as they moved through the steps of the waltz. Eleanor concentrated on not stumbling, on maintaining the correct distance, on remembering to breathe. You move with precision, Miss Blackwood, the Duke observed. Like someone accustomed to navigating carefully, his perception unsettled her. Life often requires careful navigation, Your Grace. Indeed it does. His eyes, she noticed, were not merely dark but a deep shade of blue, like the night sky just after sunset. Tell me, what else do you observe that others miss? For the remainder of the dance, Eleanor found herself engaged in the most unusual conversation of her life. The Duke asked her opinion on everything from the music selection to the architectural features of the ballroom. He listened to her responses with genuine interest, occasionally offering observations of his own that revealed a sharp mind behind his reserved demeanor. When the dance ended, he escorted her back to her position near the wall. Thank you, Miss Blackwood, for a most enlightening conversation. The pleasure was mine, Your Grace, she replied, meaning it sincerely. He bowed and moved away, soon engaged by a group of gentlemen discussing political matters. Eleanor remained where she was, processing what had just occurred. For a brief moment, she had been seen, truly seen, by someone who had no reason to notice her at all. Across the room, she caught her mother's sharp gaze and Marianne's frown of displeasure. The momentary warmth she had felt cooled rapidly. She had broken the unspoken rule of her existence. She had drawn attention to herself as the evening continued. Eleanor retreated further into the shadows, but she could not forget the feeling of being recognized, of having her thoughts valued. It was a dangerous sensation for someone who had learned to survive by being overlooked. The Blackwood carriage ride home was silent and tense. Eleanor sat with her hands folded in her lap, acutely aware of her sister's rigid postures and her mother's tight-lipped displeasure. The moment they crossed the threshold of their home, the carefully maintained social facades crumbled. What were you thinking? Lady Blackwood demanded, rounding on Eleanor. Dancing with the Duke of Harrington, when you know Marianne has been hoping for his notice. I didn't seek his attention, Mother, Eleanor replied quietly. He approached me. And you should have politely excused yourself, Marianne snapped, her beautiful face contorted with anger. Instead, you monopolized him for an entire dance. Catherine joined in, her voice cutting. Everyone was staring and whispering. It was humiliating. What could the Duke possibly have been thinking? Eleanor had no answer. She couldn't explain the connection she had felt with the Duke, the strange sense that he had seen past her, carefully constructed invisibility, to something genuine beneath. Go to your room, Lady Blackwood ordered. We'll discuss your behavior in the morning. Eleanor obeyed. Climbing the stairs to her small bedroom, she changed out of her ball gown, carefully hanging it up, despite knowing she would likely never wear it again. Then she reached for her botanical journal, seeking comfort in its familiar pages. It wasn't there. Panic fluttered in her chest as she searched under her mattress, in her small desk, behind her modest collection of books. All 7 of her journals, years of work, observation, and the only true expression of herself, were missing. A soft knock at her door preceded Marianne's entrance. Her sister's anger had cooled into something more calculated. Looking for these? Marianne held up one of the journals, its leather cover unmistakable. Please give those back, Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. They're private. Private. Marianne laughed softly. Like your private conversation with the Duke? Your private dance that everyone witnessed. Marianne, please. Mother agrees that your hobby has encouraged inappropriate notions about your place. Marianne's tone was almost sympathetic, which somehow made it worse. These childish scribblings have given you ideas above your station. Eleanor lunged forward, but Marianne stepped back, keeping the journal out of reach. Where are the others? Catherine is burning them in the kitchen fireplace, Marianne replied calmly. This is the last one. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Eleanor's feet. You can't. It's already done. Marianne's expression hardened. Remember your purpose in this family, Eleanor. You exist to support us, not to draw attention away from us. You're meant to be invisible. With those words, Marianne left, taking the final journal with her. Eleanor stood frozen, unable to move as the truth of her sister's words sank in. Her invisibility wasn't accidental. It was functional. It served a purpose. She had been cultivated as the background against which her sisters could shine. In the days that followed, Eleanor performed her duties with mechanical precision. She managed the household accounts, mended linens, and kept her eyes downcast during meals. She accepted her punishment without complaint, understanding now that her brief moment of visibility had threatened the family's careful balance. On the 4th day after the ball, as Eleanor was reviewing the tradesmen's bills in the morning room, the butler appeared at the door. Miss Eleanor, he announced with unusual formality. The Duke of Harrington is calling. Eleanor looked up in shock, her pen slipping from her fingers and leaving an ink blot on the account book. There must be some mistake, Lady Blackwood said, rising quickly from her seat. He must be calling on Marianne. Show him to the drawing room at once. The butler cleared his throat. Begging your pardon, my lady, but His Grace specifically asked to speak with Miss Eleanor Blackwood. The room fell silent. Eleanor felt her mother and sister's eyes upon her, their expressions moving from disbelief to suspicion to calculation. Well, Lady Blackwood finally said, her voice brittle. We mustn't keep His Grace waiting. Eleanor, straighten your collar and go to the drawing room. Marianne, Catherine, accompany your sister. I shall join you momentarily. As Eleanor rose on unsteady legs, she caught Marianne's whispered warning. Remember your place. But as she walked toward the drawing room, Eleanor wondered if her place was changing, and what price she would pay for that change. The Duke of Harrington stood by the drawing room window, his tall figure silhouetted against the morning light. He turned as Eleanor entered, followed closely by her sisters, and moments later, Lady Blackwood. Your Grace, Lady Blackwood gushed. What an unexpected honor. May I present my daughters? You've met Eleanor, of course, and this is Marianne, my eldest, and Catherine. The Duke bowed politely to each sister, but addressed Eleanor directly. Miss Blackwood, thank you for receiving me. I hope I haven't called at an inconvenient time. Not at all, Your Grace, Eleanor replied, aware of her mother's sharp gaze. Might I have a word with you? The Duke asked. Before Eleanor could respond, he added, and with your family, regarding a matter of some importance. Lady Blackwood's expression brightened. Of course. Please be seated. The Duke remained standing. I believe this conversation would be better conducted in the presence of your solicitor, Lady Blackwood. I've taken the liberty of asking mine to join us. He should arrive shortly. Alarm flashed across Lady Blackwood's face. Solicitor? I don't understand. It concerns your family's financial situation, the Duke said evenly. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. How could he know? The butler announced the arrival of not one but 2 solicitors. The Duke's man, Mr. Winters, and Mr. Phillips, who had managed the Blackwood affairs since before Eleanor's father died. I don't see why this is necessary, Lady Blackwood protested weakly. I believe Miss Eleanor does, the Duke replied, his gaze meeting Eleanor's. In the uncomfortable silence that followed, Eleanor realized that her careful management of their finances had merely postponed the inevitable. The Duke had somehow discovered the truth she had tried so desperately to hide. Mr. Phillips cleared his throat. Your Grace has approached me with concerns about the Blackwood estate's solvency. I explained that I was bound by confidentiality. Until I mentioned certain creditors who have approached me regarding the late Lord Blackwood's debts, the Duke finished. Lady Blackwood sank into a chair. What is the meaning of this? Mr. Phillips opened his briefcase and removed several documents. I've been attempting to discuss these matters with you for some time. I told you to handle everything, Lady Blackwood said dismissively. That's what we pay you for. With respect, my lady, some matters require your attention. The estate is entailed to a distant cousin, as you know. The funds set aside for your daughter's dowries have been depleted. Impossible, Marianne interjected. Father assured us. Your father made investments that unfortunately did not prosper, Mr. Phillips explained gently. Miss Eleanor has been managing admirably, but the situation has become untenable. All eyes turned to Eleanor, who stood with her hands clasped tightly before her. You knew, Lady Blackwood whispered. All this time, Eleanor nodded. I've been selling items gradually, reducing expenses where I could without drawing notice. I thought if Marianne or Catherine made an advantageous match. One marriage wouldn't be sufficient, Mr. Winters interrupted, laying out additional papers. The debts are too substantial. The Duke gestured to the documents. These represent the full accounting of your situation, Lady Blackwood. I've had my people verify the figures. Eleanor moved forward to examine the papers. The numbers confirmed her worst fears. They were not merely in debt. They were ruined. Even if both her sisters married wealthy men tomorrow, the family would still face financial collapse. Why? Eleanor asked, looking up at the Duke. Why involve yourself in our affairs? His expression remained unreadable. Initially, professional interest. Rumors reached me about investments your father made before his death. When I began investigating, I discovered the extent of the situation. And now, Eleanor pressed. Now it is personal concern, he replied simply. Lady Blackwood rose, straightening her shoulders. Your Grace, while we appreciate your concern, these are private family matters. Not entirely, the Duke countered. Several of your creditors are known to me. They've been persuaded to delay calling in their debts. But that arrangement is temporary. A heavy silence fell over the room. Eleanor stared at the papers before her, seeing in black and white what she had long suspected. She had never been meant to make an advantageous match. Her sister's prospects had always taken precedence, because the family needed not one, but two wealthy marriages to survive. She had always been the expendable daughter. The realization should have hurt, but instead, Eleanor felt an odd sense of clarity. Her invisibility hadn't been an accident or a cruelty. It had been a necessity. The family couldn't afford for all three daughters to shine. What do you propose, Your Grace? Eleanor asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. The Duke's gaze met hers directly. I propose a solution, Miss Blackwood. Lady Blackwood stepped forward eagerly. Marianne would make an excellent Duchess, Your Grace. The Duke didn't look away from Eleanor. I wasn't addressing Marianne, Lady Blackwood. Marianne gasped. Catherine's mouth fell open. Lady Blackwood clutched the back of a chair for support. I don't understand, Eleanor said carefully. I am proposing marriage, Miss Blackwood, the Duke said. To you. The room spun around Eleanor. This made no sense. Dukes didn't marry invisible middle daughters with no dowry and no particular beauty. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Because you see what others miss, he answered. Because you've shouldered burdens without complaint. Because when we spoke, I recognized something rare, honesty without calculation. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. And because I believe you deserve to be seen. Eleanor Blackwood. The papers on the table between them represented both her family's ruin and her unexpected opportunity. The Duke wasn't offering rescue from financial disaster. That was merely the context. He was offering recognition of her worth, a worth her family had never acknowledged. Eleanor looked from the documents to the Duke's face, seeing there not pity, but respect. For the first time in her life, someone was giving her a real choice. "I require time to consider your proposal, Your Grace," Eleanor said, her voice surprisingly steady. The Duke nodded. "Of course. Shall we say 3 days?" "Eleanor," Lady Blackwood exclaimed. "There is nothing to consider. His Grace has offered you an extraordinary opportunity. An opportunity that deserves careful reflection," the Duke interrupted firmly. "I would not wish Miss Blackwood to feel pressured into a decision of such magnitude." Mr. Phillips gathered the documents, promising to leave copies for the family's review. The solicitors departed, followed by the Duke, who bowed formally to Eleanor before taking his leave. The moment the front door closed, chaos erupted. "How dare you hesitate?" Lady Blackwood demanded. "Do you understand what the Duke's proposal means for this family? A solution to our financial problems," Eleanor said quietly. "Our salvation," Catherine corrected. "With you as a duchess, our prospects would be transformed." Marianne, who had remained silent since the Duke's proposal, finally spoke. "Why you? What did you do to attract his attention?" "Nothing," Eleanor answered truthfully. "I was simply myself." "Impossible," Marianne scoffed. "Men like the Duke don't notice women like you without reason." The words should have stung, but Eleanor found they no longer had power to wound her. "Perhaps that's precisely why he did notice me, because I wasn't trying to be noticed." Lady Blackwood seized Eleanor's arm. "Listen to me carefully. You will accept the Duke's proposal. You will save this family from ruin. It is the least you can do, after concealing our true situation for so long." Eleanor gently, but firmly removed her mother's hand. "I will consider his proposal carefully," as he requested. For the next 2 days, Eleanor endured alternating tactics from her family. Marianne's cold silence, Catherine's emotional appeals, and their mother's threats and entreaties. Through it all, she maintained her composure, continuing her household duties while contemplating the choice before her. On the evening of the second day, Eleanor slipped out to the small garden behind their townhouse. The spring air was cool, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. She sat on a stone bench, finally alone with her thoughts. Marriage to the Duke would solve her family's financial problems. It would elevate her to a position of influence and privilege she had never imagined possible. But would it merely exchange one form of invisibility for another? Would she become a convenient solution, rather than a person in her own right? "Miss Blackwood." Eleanor startled at the Duke's voice. He stood at the garden gate, his tall figure unmistakable, even in the gathering dusk. "Your Grace," she said, rising quickly. "I didn't expect." "Forgive the intrusion," he said, remaining by the gate. "I know I promised you 3 days. But I felt we should speak privately before you make your decision." Eleanor gestured to the bench beside her. "Please join me." He crossed the small garden and sat, maintaining a respectful distance. "I realize my proposal must have seemed abrupt, perhaps even calculating. It was unexpected," Eleanor acknowledged. "And I confess I'm still trying to understand your motivations." The Duke was silent for a moment, his profile strong against the darkening sky. "I have observed many marriages in my circle, Miss Blackwood, arrangements made for advantage, for connection, for continuation of bloodlines. Few are based on genuine respect or compatibility. And you believe ours would be different. I believe it could be." He turned to face her directly. "You possess qualities I value: intelligence, discretion, strength of character. You manage difficult circumstances with grace. You see beauty in what others overlook. Those are practical considerations," Eleanor noted, "not romantic ones." "I'm not a romantic man, Miss Blackwood. I'm offering a partnership based on mutual respect and common purpose." "What purpose would that be?" "The responsible stewardship of my estates and position. The creation of a household based on integrity rather than appearances." He paused. "And perhaps in time, genuine affection." Eleanor studied him in the fading light. "And if I decline?" "Then I will respect your decision. Your family's financial situation would remain precarious, but I would not withdraw my assistance entirely. I'm not offering marriage as ransom for their security." His answer surprised her. "You would help regardless." "Within reason. I admire your dedication to your family, even when they've failed to value you appropriately." The simple acknowledgement of her worth brought unexpected tears to Eleanor's eyes. She blinked them away, unwilling to have her judgment clouded by emotion. "If I were to accept," she said carefully, "I would have conditions." The Duke's eyebrow rose slightly. "I'm listening." "I would expect to be a true partner, not merely a convenient solution. I would require respect for my interests and opinions. And I would need assurance that this arrangement would not merely transfer me from one form of invisibility to another." "Those aren't conditions, Miss Blackwood," the Duke replied. "They are reasonable expectations that I would gladly meet." Eleanor took a deep breath. In this quiet garden, away from her family's demands and society's expectations, she found clarity. The Duke wasn't offering rescue. He was offering choice. The difference was profound. "Then, Your Grace," she said, "I accept your proposal." The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the Duke's private chapel. It was a simple ceremony by aristocratic standards. Elegant, but without ostentation. Eleanor wore a gown of ivory silk, its clean lines and minimal embellishments reflecting her own understated nature. The Duke had insisted she choose everything herself, from the fabric to the small cluster of early summer flowers she carried. Lady Blackwood had protested the lack of grandeur, but for once her opinion held no sway. This was Eleanor's day, orchestrated according to her preferences. As she spoke her vows, Eleanor felt a strange sense of peace. She was making this choice with clear eyes, understanding both its limitations and its possibilities. When the Duke, Harrington, as she now thought of him, slid the ring onto her finger, his touch was gentle, his eyes holding a promise of respect. "I present to you the Duke and Duchess of Harrington," the priest announced. Duchess. The title felt foreign, like a garment made for someone else. Yet as Harrington offered his arm and led her from the chapel, Eleanor realized that her new identity wasn't about the title at all. It was about being acknowledged, being named. The small wedding breakfast that followed was attended only by family and close connections. Eleanor observed her mother and sisters navigating this new reality with varying degrees of calculation. Lady Blackwood had already begun dropping casual references to "my daughter, the Duchess." Marianne maintained a brittle smile, while Catherine seemed genuinely bewildered by the turn of events. "Are you ready?" Harrington asked quietly as the gathering drew to a close. Eleanor nodded. Tonight they would travel to their London residence. In a week, they would depart for his primary estate in Derbyshire. A new life awaited, one she could scarcely imagine. 3 days later, Eleanor made her first public appearance as the Duchess of Harrington at a musical evening hosted by the Countess of Wexford. The invitation had arrived the day after their wedding, clearly prompted by curiosity about the Duke's unexpected choice of bride. As they entered the Countess's drawing room, conversation faltered. Eleanor felt the weight of scrutiny as she moved beside Harrington, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She wore a gown of deep blue silk, simple by the standards of the room, but of undeniable quality. Her only jewelry was her wedding ring and a pair of sapphire earrings, a wedding gift from her husband. "The Duke and Duchess of Harrington," the butler announced. The Countess hurried forward. "Your Grace, how delightful, and this must be your bride." "Indeed," Harrington replied. "May I present my wife, Eleanor, Duchess of Harrington." Eleanor. Not the Duchess or my wife alone, but Eleanor. The sound of her name spoken with such deliberate clarity sent a ripple of warmth through her. "A pleasure, Your Grace," the Countess said, her curious gaze taking in every detail of Eleanor's appearance. "The pleasure is mine, Lady Wexford," Eleanor replied, her voice steady. "I've heard your musical evenings are unparalleled." As the evening progressed, Eleanor found herself the object of intense curiosity. Ladies who had never acknowledged her existence now sought introductions. Gentlemen who had looked through her at balls now bowed with deference. It was a strange sensation, being suddenly visible after a lifetime of invisibility. Across the room, she spotted her sisters, who had also been invited, a courtesy to the Duke's new relations. Marianne's expression was a study in conflicting emotions as she watched Eleanor navigate her new social position with unexpected grace. The most remarkable moment came during a discussion about a new botanical exhibition at Kew Gardens. The conversation had turned to the cultivation of rare orchids, a subject on which Eleanor had some knowledge from her reading. "What is your opinion, Duchess?" asked Lord Hathaway, a noted botanist. Before Eleanor could respond, Harrington spoke. My wife has a particular interest in botanical illustration. Eleanor, you were telling me about the differences in orchid species just yesterday. Perhaps you might share your observations. The room fell silent, all eyes on Eleanor, in that moment. She understood what her husband had done. He had not merely made her visible. He had made her voice worthy of being heard. 1 year later, Eleanor sat in the morning room of Harrington House, sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Before her on the table lay a leather-bound volume, its cover embossed in gold. Botanical Observations of Derbyshire and Surrounds, by Eleanor Harrington, Duchess of Harrington. Her fingers traced the letters of her name. The book contained 60 of her illustrations, accompanied by her detailed observations, the culmination of a year spent exploring the extensive grounds of her new home. Harrington had arranged for its private publication, insisting that her work deserved proper documentation. Only 20 copies, she had protested when he first suggested it. For now, he had replied. Though I suspect the Royal Botanical Society will request more once they see the quality of your work. The door opened, and Harrington entered, a stack of correspondence in his hand. He said, bending to kiss her cheek, a gesture that had evolved naturally over the months of their marriage. Good morning, she replied, smiling up at him. Any news from London? Several matters requiring attention. He sat beside her, sorting through the letters. The Home Secretary seeks my opinion on the factory reform bill. And your mother writes again about Catherine's prospects. Eleanor nodded. Since her marriage, her family's situation had stabilized. They weren't wealthy, but they were secure. Thanks to the allowance, Harrington had settled on them. More importantly, her relationship with them had transformed. No longer the invisible daughter. She was now approached with respect, born of her title, perhaps, but respect nonetheless. The Whitmore Ball is next week, Harrington mentioned, watching her reaction carefully. Would you like to attend? Eleanor considered the question. The annual event that had changed her life's trajectory no longer held any power to intimidate her. Yes, I think I would. Excellent. I find I enjoy watching society adjust to your presence. His tone was dry, but his eyes held warmth. You've become quite impossible to ignore, Duchess. Eleanor laughed softly. A transformation I'm still adjusting to myself. It was true. The woman who had once pressed herself against walls at social gatherings now moved through them with quiet confidence. She wasn't flamboyant or attention-seeking, but she no longer apologized for occupying space. She had opinions, and expressed them. She had interests, and pursued them. She had a name, and it was spoken with respect. Her relationship with Harrington had evolved as well. What had begun as a practical arrangement had deepened into something neither of them had anticipated. They were partners in the truest sense. He consulted her on estate matters. She accompanied him to political functions, and together they had created a household based on mutual respect, rather than societal expectations. And somewhere along the way, respect had blossomed into affection, and affection into something deeper still. It revealed itself in small moments. His hand seeking hers under the dinner table, her eyes finding his across a crowded room, the comfortable silence they shared. In the library, each evening. What are you thinking? Harrington asked, noticing her contemplative expression. About visibility, she replied honestly. About the difference between being seen and being used. He nodded, understanding immediately. And have you determined the distinction? Being seen means being recognized for who you are, Eleanor said. Being used means being valued only for what you provide. A profound observation, as always. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring. And which am I guilty of, Duchess? Eleanor smiled, turning her hand to interlace her fingers with his. You saw me when I was invisible, James. You gave me a choice when I had none. And you've never once asked me to be anything other than myself. The sunlight caught the gold lettering of her book, making her name gleam. Eleanor Harrington. No longer easy to ignore. No longer the expendable daughter. No longer invisible. A woman who had found, in the most unexpected circumstances, the courage to step into the light and the partner who valued her there. No, he agreed softly. I wouldn't change a single thing about you.